Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. My name is Estulin. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now in a position to change history. I finally believe that mankind has a future. A once demoralized population with no moral purpose is coming out of a prolonged slumber. In this general awakening, people are beginning to ask the right questions. It is no longer what will I get out of it, but rather what's right. It's an international phenomenon of response and reaction to an overly felt perception that the entire world is doomed to catastrophe unless we, the people, do something about it. I've written a book on the subject of the Bilderberg group. This book, in a way, has become the catalyst for a movement around the world. Now, we don't have a lot of time, so I would like to explain to you what Bilderberg is and why it must be stopped. And also, I would like to start by saying to you that Bilderberg is the old NATO alliance. It was born in 1954 as a group, basically what they themselves call the aristocracy of purpose between American and Western European alliances on the best ways to manage the planet. We're talking about the presidents and prime ministers of every European nation, Prime Minister of Canada, President of the United States. We're talking about leading 50, 60 CEOs of the world's most powerful corporations. We're talking about European royalty, commissioners, senators, congressmen. And of course, we're talking about the world's leading press, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journals, Time Magazine, Le Monde from France, Grupo from Spain, which is one of the reasons we might not hear a lot about the Bilderbergers, or actually the group, until I've written a book on them, because these organizations, media organizations, are sworn to secrecy. Now, it's very interesting that a lot of the Bilderbergers, a lot of the attendees, members of the European Parliament, also members of the Bilderberger Inner Circle. I'm talking about Barroso, who was a member of Bilderberg. I'm talking about Van Rompuy, who attended last year's Bilderberg meeting, gave a brilliant speech, or at least that's what the Bilderbergers thought, and shortly after he became the man in Europe. We're talking about Jean-Claude Trichet, also a member of the Bilderberg. We're talking about Peter Sutherland from England. From England, I'm sorry, I meant to say Ireland. And again, these are officials unelected by anyone who represent people, apparently 500 million people in Europe. Again, they're not working for the interests of nation-state republics. We're going to talk about nation-states. We're going to talk about the future of Europe. But they rather represent the very small interests of a very powerful group of people, and unknown in most circles, called the Bilderbergers. Now, in the world of international finance, there's those who steer the events and those who react to the events. While the latter are better known, they're greater in numbers and seemingly more powerful. True power rests with the former. And at the center of this global financial system are the oligarchy, today represented by the Bilderberg group. Now, Bilderberg organization is dynamic in that it changes with the times, absorbs and creates new parts while excreting the remains of the decaying parts. Members come and go, but the system itself has not changed. It is a self-perpetuating system, a virtual spider web of interlocked financial, political, economic, and industry interests. Now, Bilderberg isn't a secret society. It's not an evil, all-seeing eye. There is no conspiracy, even though a lot of people with their infantile fantasies see it as such. No group of people, I don't care how powerful they are, sit around a table in a dark room, holding hands, staring at a crystal ball, planning the world's future. It is a meeting of people who represent a certain ideology. That ideology isn't a one-world government or new world order, as too many people mistakenly believe. Rather, the ideology of one world company limited. Back in 1968, at the Bilderberg meeting in Canada, George Ball was then the Undersecretary for Economic Affairs with JFK and Johnson. He said, where does one find a legitimate base for the power of corporate management to make decisions that can profoundly affect the economic life of nations to whose governments they have only limited responsibility? Now, the idea behind each and every Bilderberg meeting is to create, as I said before, what they call the aristocracy of purpose between European and North American elites on the best ways to manage the planet. In other words, the creation of a global network of giant cartels, more powerful than any nation on earth, destined to control the necessities of life of the rest of humanity, obviously from their vantage point, for our own good and our own benefit, because to them, we the people are the great unwashed. That's what they call us. Now, the reason people don't believe in Bilderberg and other organizations working together, exercising such control on the world stage, is that theirs is a Cartesian fantasy world in which the isolated intentions of some individuals, instead of the dynamics of social processes, shape the course of history as the movement of evolving ideas and themes over successive generations and even centuries. Now, Bilderberg is a medium of bringing together financial institutions which are the world's most powerful and most predatory financial interests, and at this time, it is that combination which is the worst enemy of humanity. I think we can all congratulate ourselves in that today, Bilderberg has become the mainstay of corporate media, and not because corporate media has suddenly remembered the responsibility to us, the people, but because we, the people, have forced them into an uncomfortable position by becoming very aware that presidents and prime ministers and your little shrinking queens and kings are puppets of powerful forces working from behind the scenes. Something has happened to us, the people in the midst of this general economic collapse. People at large are gripped by something they don't always understand, but it compels them to act in a certain way in their own interest. That's why they're doing in Greece, and that's what they're doing in Spain, and that's what they're doing in the United States. It's called anthropic principle. It's like a tidal movement came upon us and washed away our fears. As people realize that their existence is threatened, they have lost their fear, and Bilderberg and others are beginning to sense it. Perhaps that's why in a recent Council on Foreign Relations speech in Montreal, Zbigniew Brzezinski, one of the founders of the Trilateral Commission, warned that a global political awakening in combination with infighting amongst the elite was threatening to derail the move towards one world government. You see, people at this table come from very different ideological and political backgrounds. Now, what unites us, however, is that we're all patriots. All those who oppose us, those who work for secret societies, who have sold their nations out for a pound of flesh, they're traitors. Not only traitors of their people and nation, but also traitors of humanity as a whole. Now, the subject of this press conference is Bilderberg towards One World Company Limited. About 650 years ago, the economy of Europe had collapsed into what is known as Europe's New Dark Age, the greatest economic and demographic collapse of Europe since the collapse of the Roman Empire. Then, in the middle of the 14th century, much of the power of the oligarchy who ruled the world then suddenly and abruptly disintegrated. This disintegration erupted as a sudden chain reaction collapse of the worst financial bubble of debt speculation in history until nowadays, when the banking houses of Bardi and Peruzzi went under. This disintegration or collapse of the Lombard debt bubble caused a collapse in the power amongst the oligarchical families. Now, what does it have to do with Bilderberg? You see, modern history supersedes medieval history at that point or moment that the institutions which singularly distinguished modern from medieval were put into place. What were those institutions? Well, on the one hand, the conception of the modern nation-state republics under the government of natural law. If you've been listening to Nigel Farage speak in the European Parliament, very, very often he will speak about the meaning of nation-state republics. Don't take that concept lightly. It's the most important concept developed over the last 650 years of our history. And second is the central role of the fostering of scientific and technological progress as the mandate given to the Republic. Now, these two ideals represent a crucial argument. Their existence as institution in any part of Europe changed everything in all of Europe because these institutions increased the rate of development of per capita and per square kilometer of mankind over nature. So no nation could afford not to progress, not to develop for the fear of being left hopelessly behind. And the first success occurred in France with Louis XI, who doubled per capita income of France and defeated all of France's enemies. Louis XI's success sparked a chain reaction in other nations, beginning with England with Henry VII and also elsewhere. Now, another key idea to come out of Council of Florence, which was later implemented in the United States, is a universal principle of general welfare, on which all of modern civilized society is based. Now, general welfare doesn't mean a useless bum sitting on a couch eating a pizza, slobbering all over himself, watching television while he's waiting for the government check to arrive. It is a question of immortality. What's the intention of the existence of man and government? It's to provide for the welfare of future generations of mankind, to ensure survival as a species. The principle of the general welfare, as expressed in the summation in the preamble of the Federal Constitution of the United States, is the fundamental law. So how is it related to today? I have another couple of minutes to go and I'll finish and you can ask me questions. You see, the people such as the Bilderbergers, what they want is an empire. That's what globalization is, just another word for an empire. And too many people believe that in order to have an empire, you need money. You have all heard the phrase, the money elite. But you see, money is not a determinant of wealth and the economy. Money doesn't make the world go around. Money has no intrinsic value. Human mind affects that development. And this is how we, the people, and mankind is measured. This is the true meaning of immortality. What separates us from animals is our ability to discover universal physical principles. It allows us to innovate, which subsequently improves the lives of people by increasing the power of man over nature. You see, what Bilderberg are doing right now in the world economy, they're destroying it on purpose. Now, this isn't the first time either. This was already done in the 14th century. We're talking about the New Dark Age. 30% of the population then was wiped out. And one of the things we're seeing right now, the concepts of zero growth, zero progress, these are not new concepts. Bilderbergers and their cohorts, they know exactly what they're doing. Back in 1973, Club of Rome came up with a paper called The Limits to Growth. CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, that's the American cousin to the Bilderberg group, they came up with a Project 1980s paper promoting controlled disintegration of the world economy. And of course, Bilderberg themselves, in the mid-1990s, came up with a very interesting concept, demand destruction. Now, how do you destroy demand? Well, you destroy demand by destroying the world economy on purpose. If you go back to the Great Depression, it really wasn't a Great Depression at all. It was simply a transfer of wealth. Okay, the Great Depression was not an event that wiped out American capitalists. Okay. I've been told that about a minute ago. You see, we're talking about the question of leadership and the question of immortality. All of the leaders of society, especially in times of crisis, are leaders because they measure up to some approximation of that standard. We're talking about a greater good for humanity. Now, I'm not talking about a scientific problem or economic problem, but rather a morality question, a question of immortality. Do we as nation states, as people of the planet, believe in the future of mankind? And what kind of future will that be in 100, 200, or even 500 years from now? Do we have a right to dream? And if we have a sense of purpose for being here, then the bad guys simply can't win. And finally, in closing, I was talking again about nation-state republics. We should be a fraternity of nations, of sovereign nation-states, united by a common purpose for humanity. Until we can bring mankind into the age of reason, history will be shaped in actuality, not by the wills of masses of humanity, but by a mere handful who, for the purposes of good and evil, steer the fate of mankind, generally as herds of cows are steered to and from the pasture, and occasionally also to the slaughterhouse. I'll stop right now and welcome your questions. Thank you very much.